Honestly, at this point, this is just embarrassing. Okay, so a couple days ago, some genius, names, I don't know, Eclies or something, decided that it would be a fantastic idea to put out his new Roblox Jojo game. Ooh, so fancy. Never seen one of those before in this oversaturated as hell market. And naturally, just like the rest of these pieces of shit, is it good? No, of course not. And when it comes down to it, I don't even think they tested the game at all. I think they just put it out, they hoped it would work, it didn't, and then they're just gonna give up. Seriously, I mean, some of this stuff has to be seen to be believed. You can time stop, chuck a bolt of lightning, and crash the whole server. What the fuck, guys? Really? If you get hit with some gasoline, you get stuck in place. If you get beat down, you get stuck in place. Hit by a teleport move, you get stuck in place. Can I play the game, or am I just gonna be stuck in place all day? And then there's the balancing. Oh my god, the balancing. What were they thinking? Oh, let's make it so that way you can run it Mach 7 and charge up an instant kill, one shot. Unfucking believable. Kill people in 3 moves, kill people in 2 moves, kill people in 1 move. Time stops everywhere. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It sucks. Is it worth it? No. Should you play it? No, I can't. Okay, so pretty obviously I'm talking about my game. I did our public test a couple days ago, and to say that it was a mess would be putting it lightly. Although, admittedly, I knew it would be a mess going in, and hopefully I made it clear enough to the people that were going to be logging on that it was going to be a mess. That being said, I think the most important thing that I need to do is extend a huge and massive thank you to every single person who decided to help out and test this, well, broken mess. As of right now, Flames of Conflict has roughly 30,000, a little over 30,000 visits over the course of literally just one day, and that has completely blown my expectations out of the water. I really didn't think there would be a whole lot of interest for the game. I thought we'd maybe cap out at like 100 or 200 players, and I think there was a point where we had like 800 or 900, which was crazy. Now, big surprise, a lot of that obviously fell off really quickly when there were several game-breaking bugs that could crash servers, and the fact that, all things considered, I mean, come on, it's pretty much a base plate right now. It's a Battlegrounds game that, in a lot of ways, doesn't work. That said, I literally promise you this isn't a joke. I spent the entirety of Wednesday, from when it went live to roughly 9:30 p.m., interacting with you guys and fixing bugs. And oh my god, was that draining. Regardless, I think we ironed out a lot of stuff throughout the day. And of course, we're going to be continuing to iron out a lot of stuff going forwards. That said, something that I think needs to be said, and it's important for me to be transparent about, is that, just for the record, there's a lot of stuff that I'm still really worried about, and I want to clue you guys in onto what those things are, as well as how we're hoping to try to fix them, and the fact that we're still looking for help in a lot of ways. So here's the deal. The most important thing that I was trying to get out of this test was to focus and test the game's stability, and the general consensus that we got is that the game is completely unstable, which isn't all that surprising, but I was hoping that wouldn't be the case. Obviously, as first-time developers on Roblox, both my brother and myself did our best, but there's only so much that we know, and obviously we weren't going to nail it on the first go-around. But that was one of the most important things about doing this early, was that we wanted to make sure that before we got way too deep into everything, we could, be able to go back and rewrite a lot of things. That said, obviously there's still a lot that's in there right now, and that means that there's probably going to be a lot of things that need to get rewritten, and that's a bummer. Regardless, I want to show you guys a lot of the potential performance issues that were being caused and what was causing them, just for the sake of having some understanding, because I think it's important to have some insight into the back end of game development, even if you've got no idea. Our main source of performance issues in the entire test was memory leaks by a huge margin. If you were playing, you might have noticed that by the 2 hour mark that a server was active, it became borderline unplayable, and that's because the memory leaks that we had were out of control. Now granted, we've probably fixed hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of these by now, but a lot of them have gone unfound and undiagnosed, and that's where the problems start. If you want to know how a lot of these things happen and why I'm concerned about them, well, I'm gonna show you, or at least try my best to. A lot of what Flames of Conflict runs on is something called a connection. More importantly, a frame time connection, as we call them here. A frame time connection is basically a timer that runs at the same frame rate as the server, which is of course 60 frames per second. Roblox has several different ways of doing waits, but a lot of them will end up being based on your computer or device's frame rate rather than the frame rate of the server, which is why we're using connections. But the thing about connections is that at some point there has to be a disconnect. And so if you want to see how we got to such a problematic situation, well, here you go. Here's a connection for the time stop move for Star Platinum. You can see at the beginning it's declared, and then it starts and it says, while the frame time is less than or equal to the time of the move, run a wait. So until it gets to a specific time earlier on in the move, it's not going to do anything. Then once it hits that time, we go down to the sound ended for the time stop. This gets declared and used, and then we move back down to another frame time less than or equal to duration minus 30 to wait again. This is going to basically wait until the sound effect is finished to actually physically end the time stop itself. Now after all of this is wrapped up, we destroy the server sphere, which is the time stop bubble that you see. We destroy the gravity that's applied to the player, so that way you don't float around anymore. And most importantly, we end the connection. Once the connection is over, that timer stops running. Now, the problem is that as it stands right now, if you die before the timer completes and your body despawns and respawns, the way it works on Roblox is you've basically been erased from the game. And if you get erased from the game before you reach the disconnect, that connection goes on forever. So you can probably start to see the problems here. After the hour, 2 hour mark, we've got connections that are running timers that do nothing ad infinitum forever. So of course we could set it up so that way there's a check every single time that you're running any of these things, where if your character goes down to 0 HP and is dead, then it ends the connection immediately, which I've tried in the past, but it isn't going to stop people from leaving the game, getting erased from the game, and then when they get erased from the game, the timer goes on forever. You get the idea. Now, I'm already sure that I'm gonna get 350 DMs on how to fix this, 350 comments below on how to fix this, 350 DMs about how our code sucks. And yeah, I get it. So that's a perfect chance for me to talk about the feedback that we got from the test. And most importantly, the fact that I literally read all of it. If you left any feedback in any of the feedback or bug reporting channels for the game, I 100% guarantee you that I have read it, because I went through all of them. That being said, I was also sent about 350 million DMs over the last couple days, whether they were referring to developer hiring, people attempting to give me advice, people reaching out because they wanted to contribute in 350 ways, people that were trolling. You know, you get the idea. I got a lot of them. So if you sent me a DM in the last couple of days and I didn't respond to it, that's pretty much the norm. If you sent me a DM in the last couple of days and you were asking about the positions for modelers and builders, that's kind of currently on hold, at the very least until we get some of this other stuff under control. That said, there is something that I do want to bring up that I'm not going to go into a whole lot here. It might get its own video later, but that's that I am looking to put together some sort of contributor program for the game. There were a lot of people that reached out to me and were like, hey, I just want to help. You don't have to pay me anything, which was mind-boggling. Like, listen, I don't know what's in it for you guys. I don't know if you just want to do it for the love of the game, but I have an immense amount of respect for that, and I think that it would be doing both myself and every single player of the game a huge disservice if I had all these people wanting to help and just said, nah, tough luck, buddy, I'm afraid. Because really, that's what a lot of this stuff comes down to. Developer permissions and giving people developers permissions is extremely risky. That said, there are several things that people don't need developer permissions to do, things like animations and VFX and all that kind of stuff. But I think the most important thing about all of this, and the reasons why a lot of these fears are somewhat valid but mostly invalid, is the fact that, let's say worst case scenario, some bad actor shows up and decides to steal and release the entire code base to every single person who wants to have it. Am I really going to be so insecure that I think that I should be worried about someone else using my code to make a better game than the game that I'm currently making? Or should I feel secure in the fact that I have faith in myself, my brother, and everyone else that we're going to bring on to not have to worry about that? Because why would someone want to play some knockoff budget version of my game when my game is just better? And if their game is just better, then clearly I've fucked up somewhere along the way, and no amount of stealing code was going to change the fact that someone just did a much better job than I did. So at some point in the near future, I am looking to put together some sort of contributor program to get a whole bunch of passionate people together, and if they want to work on stuff that's completely outside of the current workflow for us, I'd be more than happy to put that stuff in the game. That said, like I said, in terms of the hiring of developers to do other stuff, I want the game mostly under control and less me freaking out about the stability of it before we get to that stuff. Now, in terms of feedback, I wanted to go over some of the most important stuff so that way people, first of all, know that I read it, and second of all, you can hear my thoughts on all of it and how a lot of stuff is going to change. First, I want to talk mobile. So, there were a lot of things on mobile that they have flown a little bit under the radar. So I do want to extend a huge apology to all of our mobile players. I'm sorry. First of all, you guys didn't have shift lock. You need shift lock. I know you needed shift lock. I even mentioned it to my brother like a week before we ended up doing the test. Then I forgot. We never got around to it. Shift lock is coming. Yeah, I screwed up. There were a bunch of people that were talking about the buttons and how they thought that they were too big, they took up too much of the screen, and I think it would be a good idea to let you guys have an ability to scale the buttons on specific scales, so we'll probably be doing something like that. But the most important thing was, of course, the menus. Now, for anyone who's playing on PC, you probably never would have known this, aside from the menus being placeholder and kind of shitty, but if you were a mobile player and you wanted to equip an item, for example, in order for it to register a touch, you had to manually click on the thing that you were trying to do with one finger and then equip it with another finger, which, as you can probably guess, is incredibly unintuitive and a total mess. So yeah, we need some more functionality for the buttons and menus on mobile. Sorry about that. Overall though, to be perfectly honest, I expected a lot more mobile reports, and I didn't get as many as I thought, which means that it must have worked at least to some capacity. That said, something that didn't work to any capacity was console. Yeah, Jesus Christ, sorry about that. So, we may or may not have made the game borderline unplayable on console. So for the couple of you that were trying to play on console, yeah, sorry. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you didn't play on console, basically, we forgot to add functionality to go through the menus and, most importantly, the skill trees on a controller, which meant that it was literally impossible for you to level up your stand unless you could plug in a mouse and keyboard to your console. Now granted, I would assume that most people who have a console also have a mouse, so it's not like you were completely soft-locked, but come on, obviously you should be able to interact with the menus. Yeah, we'll get there. And of course, naturally, once again, shift lock was another thing that was absent on controller, I think, or at the very least it wasn't rebindable. I know that if you're on PC, you can enable shift lock manually, and then you can sort of go in and use a controller and it'll work. I don't know how that works on console, but once it's rebindable, then it'll be fine and you should be able to use it on console. That said, when we move into more general quality of life stuff, there was a lot of stuff on here that I think was really good, so I wanted to talk about it. The first was that there was a huge discussion when it came to running and sprinting and the way that it got stopped when you used moves, when you took damage, all that kind of stuff. And this is something that I'm kind of in the middle about, and I haven't really totally made up my mind, to be perfectly honest. There was a lot of people that were upset that when you used your moves or when you got hit, you had to restart your sprint every single time. And I understand a fair amount where some of those complaints come from, but you also have to understand that a lot of the speed of the game was based around the sprint speed and the walking speed. Basically what I'm getting at is that certain speed reductions and whatnot are applied to your walking speed immediately because you go from sprinting to walking. And so when that isn't the case, we're gonna have to go through and redo every single speed change in the entire game. Not the end of the world, but it's just one more thing to consider. But the real problem that I had is mostly that I don't want people to just be flying around at warp speed all of the time, being able to weave in and out of moves while throwing moves constantly. I think it has the very high potential to, once again, raise the overall skill ceiling of the game higher than I want it to be at. As I've mentioned before, and I'm sure I'm going to mention later, The fact of the matter is, this game is designed most importantly to cater to the almost bottom common denominator of players who just want to go in and hit buttons. And if they've got some guy running around at sprint speed all the time, and they're running around at sprint speed all the time, it makes it a hell of a lot more difficult to track and hit that person with moves than it otherwise normally would be. So as of right now, the entire sprint discussion is still up in the air. I don't have a hardline stance on this completely, but I'm heavily leaning towards leaving it where it is, and those are my reasonings for doing that. On the same sort of vein, in terms of controversial stuff, I want to talk about the leveling and Ascension discussion. There was a lot of good feedback when it came to leveling and Ascension, and a lot of stuff that I would like to implement, but I'm sort of on the fence about solely because of playtime, monetization, that kind of stuff. These are things that I would wager a lot of other developers wouldn't talk to you about, and would never in a million years dare tell you, hey, we're doing this to waste your time, but in reality, there has to be some amount of time wasting going on because of the way Roblox works itself. For those who may or may not know, Roblox in of itself tracks players' playtime and player retention rate. So the longer they play the game, the more they're going to push your game. And so if you can just complete all of the content really quickly or level up stuff really quickly, and in general it doesn't take a decent chunk of time to do things, then Roblox is just not going to care. And they're not going to push our game, and we're just going to get hurt in the long run. So that's where we get into the discussion about the leveling and Ascension stuff. As it stands right now, if you level up your stand or ability or player, what have you, up to level 35, you can ascend it, and when you do, it'll increase your level by 5 and give you a mastery point that you can use as basically an extra skill point. You can do that 2 more times to get you up to level 50, and that's where things max out. You can ascend a couple times past then, but at that point, it's just going to give you a mastery point and that's it. The problem here, of course, being that a lot of people were like, well, when the game actually comes out, if you constantly get set back to level 1, it's basically going to force you to go back to like shitty brain dead easy content, because the harder content you're just not going to realistically be able to win with level 1 stats. And that's kind of fair enough, and there were some people who had some pretty good ideas when it came to making it so that way when you ascend your stand, maybe just past Ascension level 3, so that way you still have to do this 3 times, but then after the last one, instead of resetting your skill points all the way back, it would just give you a mastery point and start the levels from the beginning. So your skill tree wouldn't reset, your skill points wouldn't reset, you get the idea. That's something that I'll definitely consider, but as I mentioned already earlier, doing something like that from the very start could directly hurt player retention, and that's something that I'm directly worried about hurting our game. Now, in terms of just flat out good ideas, there were plenty of them. I don't know how long it's going to take us to implement them, but I can almost assure you that they're coming. There were a lot of people that were upset that you had to constantly go into the keybinds menu to figure out which keybinds do what. Now granted, I've never had this problem because I guess I'm just a sweaty loser and I remember all of my buttons, and I also don't tend to use that many buttons. I usually upgrade a few of them and then just that's the end of that. Either way, a lot of people were talking about having the possibility to show all of your buttons on the side of the screen along with whatever keybind was applied to them, and I don't think that's a bad idea, so we'll probably be doing that. Rebindable shift lock is something I already talked about. I'm not entirely sure how this didn't make it into the first build, but we're definitely going to have it in going forwards. A big one was visual cues for the traits of moves, whether or not they're cancelable, whether or not they're deflectable, parryable, you get the idea. Now, to be fair, this is in the game already to some extent. If you've ever heard this noise on a move, that basically tells you that the move is going to be parryable or deflectable in some capacity. That said, there were plans to put some sort of outline on the character that's color-coded depending on what you have to do in order to deal with a move. So for example, you would get a purple glow on your character if you had a deflectable move, maybe a red glow if it was parryable, or that probably would be bad because red is bad. So I guess that would be bypassing block or completely unblockable. You get the idea. But that is something we're looking into doing. It's almost certainly going to happen at some point, and I did see that feedback. Now, there were a couple people asking about hitboxes. They're like, why can't we show the hitboxes? And most importantly, the fact that you can cheat the hell out of the game right now, which yes, I knew about that going in, and frankly, I didn't care. First of all, why can't you see hitboxes? Well, the main reason that I didn't enable you to turn on hitboxes, even though that is technically a functionality of the game in the debug branch, is because I didn't want people to constantly freak out about getting hit by hitboxes that they could see missing them, but were hitting them on the other person's screen. As I'm sure a lot of you have figured out, the vast majority of our hit detection is being handled on the client right now, and that's to prevent the feeling of trying to hit someone with a move and just having it pass through them or miss. Of course, the result of this is going to be the classic Roblox stuff where you're 3 feet from somebody's move and it hits you anyway. The other thing to consider is that a lot of the hitboxes are deceptively larger than they otherwise normally would be, once again to cater towards making moves easier to hit and less inconsistent. A general rule of thumb is if it looks like somebody's near you and they're using a move, you can expect the move to hit you even if it's a little farther away. And like I said, I don't want people having hitboxes enabled, getting some egregious footage showing that the hitbox was nowhere near them, and then sending me 800 reports and being like, your hitboxes don't work, your hitboxes don't work, your hitboxes don't work. And it's like, yeah, I know the hitboxes don't work because they're not going to work. They're never going to match up just by the way the game is programmed. Now that said, we do get a chance to talk about the cheating situation, which I got a whole bunch of clips from some people who were exploiting. They were like, hey, your game is entirely vulnerable. And yeah, I know. We actually did have a bunch of anti-cheat measures in the game that would check your distance based off of your hitboxes to try to block you from just hitting everyone on the map with a singular move over and over again. But the fact of the matter was that a lot of the moves in the game have such large ranges that those checks wouldn't end up working out and they would cause constant issues. So all of that stuff was pretty much disabled going into the test, which is why people could blatantly cheat. Anti-cheat in general going forwards is obviously going to improve, but I think at the end of the day, a lot of the anti-cheat is going to have to be handled by manual bans and stuff like that in order to stop people from just destroying all of the servers. Anti-cheat is one of those things where it becomes a rat race really quickly of developers versus cheaters, and if we spend all of our time trying to fight against cheaters, we'll never have a playable game for you guys. So I hope that makes sense. And then the last thing on general quality of life is regards to barrages, heavy punches, and the overall damage of those general moves. There was someone who was talking about how having to upgrade the barrage, heavy punch, and punch all separately just caused a lot of those moves to never get upgraded, and if you did, it felt like a waste of points sometimes. And to that, I completely agree, and I already had this thought process a little bit before, but just never got around to changing it. So going forwards, there's a very good chance that the punch node that's to the left of the skill tree on every single stand that you can use to upgrade your M1s is also going to upgrade your barrage and heavy punch. You'll still have to unlock them in order to use them, but once you do have them unlocked, the damage on that will be entirely based off of your punch upgrades. I'm almost certain that's going to happen, and hopefully that will help with the whole wasted point problem. That said, now that we're talking about damage, let's talk about the balance and gameplay discussion, which admittedly is still not even remotely high up on the priority list, but there was a lot of people talking, and so I still wanted to talk about it at least a little bit. Overall time to kill. People freaked out. I knew they would. Especially on a channel like mine where I've talked about how I don't want instant kills and I don't want one-shots, I don't want just like huge combos that kill you instantly. Me making a game like this is probably way out of left field, and a lot of people did not expect what they got. And so when they did get it, they were pissed off. I don't entirely blame them because they were going in expecting like a YBA clone where you could fight for 35 minutes, but yeah, you die in like 4 to 5 hits, and people were not thrilled. That said, I do think that a lot of the things that I was trying to do worked out pretty well, and so to all of the people who were generally freaking out about the overall time to kill, the general cooldowns being way too low, all that kind of stuff, I have incredibly bad news, which is that the vast majority of that stuff is not going to be changing. That said, of course, there are some things that were a little over the line. There were some things that we're going to be fixing and some things that are going to be toned back. But at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff that people were sending in the feedback chat, a lot of the things that I was DM'd, things where people were just like, this is broken, you've got to fix this, were just cheese build one tricks that if you just took a second to think about the counterplay to them, they wouldn't be a problem anymore. Like there was some guy who sent me a fully maxed out wide beam GER followed up by the lightning sword lightning strike. And what I think that person probably didn't realize was the fact that if you block the entirety of the wide beam and then let go and reblock before the final hit gets you, that move is parriable, which can be absolutely debilitating for the people who are using it. And when it came to the lightning strike, a lot of people didn't understand that the lightning strike that comes from above is a deflectable move. So if you're playing properly, this, oh my god, huge instant 2-shot kill move is actually a instant 0 damage move, because if you know what you're doing, you won't get hit. But this exact thing plays into what I was talking about earlier, which was lowering the mid-level skill floor and causing things like this to sort of dominate the mid-level, where someone who's trash can hit another person who's slightly better but also trash with 2 moves and win something that they otherwise would probably lose in another game. I think a lot of people are missing that, and while you might not like that, and I understand why you don't like that, that's currently the state of the game and currently what we're looking to do. Now, like I said, there are some things that are definitely going to get changed. There was a lot of people talking about anti-gank measures, and I think that that's definitely a possibility going forwards. Considering the fact that you can get killed in a couple moves, there's a very real chance that if you're getting ganked, you'll get some sort of evasive ability or maybe the ability to dash out of stun, we'll see. Health regen was a huge thing that a lot of people talked about. There was a lot of people that were talking about how the health regen was way too fast, and if you just ran away, you could get all your health back in like 2 seconds, come back and keep fighting. This was by design, and I don't really know how people missed this. Think about it. If you die in 4 seconds, and your health regen is really low, then you're going to spend half of your time regenerating your health and not actually playing the game, which kind of defeats the purpose of playing a game, doesn't it? Yes, it curbs people from running away, getting their health back, and coming back to fight you again, but as I stated in my initial video, this is not something that I'm balancing the game around, because if I balance the game around that, then our moveset variety is going to go into the floor. That said, in terms of healing stuff, a lot of people were talking about the healing via beatdowns and cutscenes, and this is something that I agree with people probably shouldn't be there. This was an experimental thing that's been there for a long time, and it was by design. Some people thought it was a bug. I think my brother said it was a bug, even though it wasn't. But yeah, as of current, the victim doesn't heal during beatdowns and cutscenes, but you do. It's the same way when it comes to your cooldowns, where they get frozen for the victim, but not for you. I made it this way because I wanted there to be a direct advantage for landing the move versus getting hit by the move, but I do think this is a little bit overkill, so it's probably going to get changed. Now, to be fair, I'm probably going to leave the ability to get your cooldowns back during beatdowns. I'm going to leave that there, at least for the user, for the time being, and if that also proves to be problematic, maybe I'll change it. I already touched on it a little bit earlier, but there was a lot of freaking out about stalling and running and how you could just run away forever and you could never catch the people who are running away forever. Some of that feedback was fair, and a lot of it centered around the healing moves in the game, where a lot of people felt like the healing moves in the game were far too strong, allowed you to instantly reset a fight and basically undo everything anyone's ever done to you, which I also agree with to an extent, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's a balancing pass on the healing moves that nerfs them heavily. And once again, as I mentioned, if we try to balance the game around stopping people from constantly running away, you end up making the game just significantly worse for all of the people who aren't already doing that, because you have a whole bunch of ass-backwards mechanics that make the game overall just feel worse to play for everyone else to prevent a couple people from playing in a scumbag way. The other thing to consider is that while obviously all of this is going to have a whole lot more consequences on a big empty wasteland map, if you consider the more competitive modes, which I presume things like 1v1s are going to be populated by the same kind of people who are complaining about this stuff, if we just add something like a battle royale circle that pushes forwards the longer the match goes on to prevent matches from going on for 30 million years, then somebody who's specced out entirely and running away forever is going to be completely screwed when the circle moves in. There are ways of dealing with this without just nerfing the crap out of everything that potentially allows it to happen. Because if somebody's doing stuff like this in a mostly stakeless area, like the main game is going to be, then I don't really see the problem. Oh no, somebody in the Outlands ran away right before I killed them, so now I can't steal all their stuff. Yeah, pardon me if I don't think that making it easier to get away before you can steal somebody's stuff is probably not the end of the world. And then the last big thing that I saw a fair amount of is there were quite a few people that were upset about the movesets of certain stands and how they felt very generic, samey, and they felt like they'd seen them all before. And that's one of those things where I almost don't even know what to say, because you guys know that this is based off of source material, right? There's only so much that you're going to be able to do with a lot of these stands, and while I think it's fair to say that you're right, a lot of the movesets are generic, and the reality is that some of the variations on some of the moves are kind of uninspired. But at the end of the day, the reasoning for that is pretty simple, and that's that when I'm going through this stuff, there's only so many ideas I can come up with, and some of the other ideas that I can come up with end up being so complex that if it's going to take several days or several weeks to program one feature for one move versus having something generic, it ends up being a quantity over quality thing. And in a lot of ways, as probably disturbing as you'll probably take this, quantity over quality in a lot of cases really is the answer. Think about it this way. If we released the game and we had 4 stands in the game, but all of them had very, very unique stands, what would a lot of people be commenting right now? They would be like, hey Eclipse, why didn't you put Stone Free in the game? Where's Gold Experience Requiem? What happened to Whitesnake? You get the idea, you get the idea, you get the idea. I wanted to make sure that when the game comes out, and even just in these play sessions, there's a lot of things that you can equip through. Because I think one of the big problems with a lot of these other Jojo games, and a lot of just games in general on Roblox, is that they release with so little in them, and then they're like, well, we'll add it over time. And so I'd rather have a lot of stuff with slightly more generic movesets than just a couple of things where people blow through all of the stuff in them in like a day and then they just never touch the game again. Anyways, I mean, that's pretty much wrapping things up, I think. As I already said, I'm very, very worried about the overall stability of things. That's #1 priority list. Hopefully we can nail that stuff down. And ideally the next time that you guys play the game in potentially a month from now, it will be in a significantly better shape in terms of stability. Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty much putting a hardline stance down for the next test, having the ability to run all of the servers for at least 3 days without any catastrophic problems and having to shut down servers. I think that's a quality assurance goal that will make sure that as we go forwards, the game's stability will remain intact. Either way, I'm just yapping at this point. So naturally, if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day now wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.